Good morning. I'm going to jump right in today with a quote from Terence McKenna. It goes like this. I'm going to read it. It's almost as though this object in hyperspace, glittering in hyperspace, throws off reflections of itself, illuminating this mystic, inspiring that saint or visionary, reflections which actually ricochet into the past, and that of these fragmentary glimpses of eternity, we can build a kind of map. So that statement, that quote, is one that McKenna talked about often. It's embedded in many of these cassette recordings that exist of his different rap sessions, which I've been talking about for the last few days. And that particular quote was used in a song by a band called the Shimmer called Re-Evolution, and came out in the 90s. And probably as I think about it, probably forms one of my just bedrock assumptions about how the universe works. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do this week with this series of videos that I've called "Teeming with Life." The underlying assumptions that I think I have. Right, I'm not laying this out as a dogma or as a creation myth that I think is the truth. Although I do think it's true, what I'm trying to do is excavate the assumptions and presuppositions that I have when I look at my practice, when I look at how I talk about the practice. So last week when I talked about first principles and the principle of practice as the maturity of the space, the equilibrium, the establishment of the intersection between a recognition of the selflessness of the self, right, the impermanence, or the non-reification of the self, the non-concretization of the self, and the mystery of the cosmos, the mystery of being. Today, this glittering object in hyperspace that McKenna talks about, I think as I scrutinize how that reflects within my own mind, I think this is probably the closest thing I have to an understanding of God, right? Or like when you think, what is the divine? Do you think of a person or an energy or a force? I think of this object and this hyperspatial object. So I don't have a real good visualization of what a hypercube looks like, but I have a pretty good sense of what it feels like, right? A lot of my understandings are kinesthetic, like I can feel a sort of a shift or a little nudge. So this object that resides in hyperspace. Now, I don't know exactly what McKenna means by hyperspace, but what I take it to mean is a step outside of time, like a position where the linear chronology of time no longer dictates our perceptions. And I think that condition is readily available to us in meditation, in dream, in art, in contemplation of music. I think that one of the sort of greatest gifts that can be recognized in practice is the idea that the human life is sort of an object that's rotating in time, and we experience a slice of it. We are a process that is unfolding, and that process, like a piece of music, can be examined in its entirety. We can think about a piece of music as something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're able to conceive of that, even though the actual experience of the music is time-bound as the sound unfolds. But we have this other way of accessing our memory of a piece of music, our anticipation of what's going to happen in a piece of music that we already know. That mindset, that easily accessible, very simple mindset, can be applied to our own being. And I think that that object of self-reflection in and out of past and future that McKenna talks about is kind of how I think of that perspective, that position that you can get to and then contemplate and consider. I love the idea of a teleological pull towards this sort of wondrous omega point. Omega point is a term that I associate with Teilhard de Chardin, the French priest, philosopher, anthropologist. But it may be that he arrived at it from somewhere else. But the idea that there is a shape towards our shape within our being that moves towards something, that moves towards this singularity. I'm actually less attached to that as an underlying truth, but I do feel that in our immediate reality, particularly as we move towards the singularity of our death, that it's a helpful shape. I don't have an intuition that the mystery of the cosmos demands that we're moving in a particular position. I think McKenna sounds fairly confident that the singularity is a presence that pulls us. My intuition and my feeling on this is that we are like pebbles dropped in a pond, and each of these pebbles can be turned into a pattern, and from that step outside of time, from that sacred space, we can observe that pattern, and what seems to be chronologically disparate parts of our life or of our experience click into place. I think this is why I like Flatland so much, because it just makes it incredibly intuitive sense to me that you have these series of relationships, the relationship between a point and a line and a square, the flatland, and then square to cube, or in the case of flatland, it's actually a sphere that demonstrates the third dimension to these flat creatures. And so the square is picked up by the sphere, and up is a concept that simply didn't exist. Now the square gets in trouble when he asks the sphere what's next, because it just, of course, makes perfect sense that there is an object that has the same relationship to the sphere that the sphere has to the square. And the sphere, who I always think is kind of a jerk, it is not a compassionate avatar, a compassionate shaman, compassionate teacher. But I think this glittering hyperspatial object that McKenna talks about is that piece right? Where time, which we always think of as kind of the x-axis, right, the thing against which everything is being measured, will flip time onto the y-axis, and then what's the x-axis? So then, visionary statements, whether it's Hildegard of Bingen, whether it's Christ or the Buddha, or your apperception of deep meaning when you first wake in the morning. I particularly love waking early and making a cup of coffee and going outside. This is what I mean. This apperception of the infinite is available right here. That rap that we have from McKenna often begins with his statement, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. And again, belief doesn't require the suspension of disbelief. Belief doesn't require that we sacrifice any logic. It means confidence. It means that belief is a coherent approach, knowing that X will lead to Y. Which maybe doesn't make much sense when we're talking about an object outside of time, outside of causation. I have a question for myself and for you all, right? I think it's helpful to visualize God, or to visualize the divine. And when I do that, what I've realized is that I have an image in my mind that comes from when I was younger than 10 years old, right, from an old hymn book where there's an image of a choir, and the choir looks like an English boys' choir, with bowl cuts and frills. And that image is wedded to my concept of the divine. Now, I think we all have images like that are worth approaching and perhaps deliberately replacing with a different image or a sensation of some kind. So I'd ask you all, this is what I've been trying to do in these videos this week in particular, is asking myself, what are the actual images or ideas that strip everything away? How do I actually think about these things? And so the idea of sort of the foundational, a universe brimming with life, with consciousness, and then this hyperspatial object that enables a pattern that isn't immediately apparent. And then this rather juvenile image that's associated with the divine. It's really interesting to see what is actually embedded in the way that I talk to myself about these very elusive ideas. So I'd ask the same question to you all as well. Like, when you sit, ask yourself, what am I really thinking when I think about God? What am I really thinking about when I think about enlightenment? What am I really thinking about when I think about the impermanent nature of self? Like, what is it that is interacting with your thought when you say that. And there's no right or wrong answer, but for me, what I found is that some of those images are ready to be discarded, and some of them are still profoundly wonderful and beautiful. I love this glittering in hyperspace object, and I think I always will. In fact, what I'm going to do as soon as I turn off this video is go and listen to that song, Re-Evolution, because it's part of my compendium of sacred texts, and I don't think I would have said that until I had sat down and recorded this. So scrutinize the images that we hold, I guess, is because they provide the intersection to the mystery. So, and they can be changed. We are plastic in how we define these things, but we do need to know what we're looking at first. All right, very good. I trust your practice is going well, and keep your wits about you.